Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Dana and this is Delighted to DIY. If you like thrift flips and budget home decor DIYs, why don't you consider hitting that red subscribe button. For DIY number one, we're going to start out with some of these wood cutouts that come in packages of 8 from Dollar Tree. We're going to need 5 of the ghost shapes, 2 of the pumpkin shapes, and 2 of the witch hat shapes. So I got ahead of myself and started painting the shapes when really we need to spackle the holes first. So you're going to spackle the holes on the pumpkins and on the witch hats. I didn't spackle the ghost shapes because they're going to be covered with scrapbook paper. When the spackling's dry, just give it a light sanding to smooth it all out, and then we'll begin painting. I painted the witch hats with black acrylic paint and the pumpkins with Craft Smart's chalk paint in burnt orange. I gave fronts, backs, and sides 2 coats on all pieces. With some scrapbook paper that I had in my stash from Close to My Heart, I began by tracing the 5 shapes onto the piece I had. I had to do this pretty carefully as this was the only piece I had and I really wanted to use this white, the cream side of it. So if you're using any other scrapbook paper, by all means, I'm sure you don't have to do it as close together as I'm doing. But to make mine fit, I had to get them really close together, and I even actually have to piece 2 pieces of paper on the last one to make it all fit. When all the ghosts were traced onto the paper, I then just used my scissors and cut them out as close as possible to the lines I had made, but just cut a little on the right side of your line, so to make it a little bigger is my tip, because then you can go in with sandpaper just to smooth out the edges once it's been glued on to the wooden shape. I then went in with my glue stick and put a generous amount on each piece of paper and glued 1 piece onto each of the ghosts. After each ghost was covered with a piece of paper on the front side, I then went in with my Dollar Tree sanding sponge, and in a downwards motion away from the ghost shape, I just cleaned up all the edges. For the smaller curved areas, I found it was a little easier using a nail file to sand off the excess scrapbook paper. Next, I used one of the wooden planks from, I think, a package of 4 or 5, and I think it's roughly 6 inches by 3 inches. I used one of these wood planks from Dollar Tree and painted it front, back, and sides with 2 coats of black acrylic paint. On my Cricut Joy, I created the stencil that says Trick Or and stuck it down, transferred it and stuck it down to my wooden piece. I began by giving the stencil a coat of the black acrylic paint to seal any of the letters and to help prevent any of the bleeding to occur. Then I went in with the burnt orange chalk paint from Craft Smart and stenciled in the word trick, and then I used white acrylic paint from Dollar Tree to paint in the word or. The white portion did take a couple of coats, drying each time in between. When the paint was mostly dry, I removed the stencil and used my weeding tool just to get rid of any of the leftover vinyl and from in the center of the letters. To make the sign look a little more aged and worn, I went over the entire piece and the edges with 150 grit sandpaper from Dollar Tree. With some black letter stickers that I had in my stash that I actually received from my dear friend Lisa from Dollar Mom here on YouTube, I spelled out the word treat on the ghost shapes. To make everything look more cohesive, I also used the same 150 grit sandpaper from Dollar Tree and sanded down the pumpkin shapes and the witch hats, and then I distressed the ghost shapes with some black acrylic paint around the edges and a bit of light dry brushing over the fronts of the image. Next was time to assemble the piece. With some gingham ribbon from Dollar Tree that I had in my stash, I began by hot gluing the ribbon onto the center back of the Trick Or wood sign piece. Then I went in with my hot glue and matched up the top of the ghost shape with the letter T just under the black wooden plank, and then hot glued that to the center of the wooden shape. Then went in with the pumpkin. Now the pumpkin, I didn't want the ribbon showing through, so I glued on at the top behind the stem the ribbon, and then cut the ribbon, and then glued on the ribbon again at the bottom part of the pumpkin below the mouth, so that way none of the ribbon was showing through the eyes and nose. If this doesn't bother you, then just keep gluing all your shapes on without making any of the cuts. But I continued this in a pattern of ghost, pumpkin, ghost, witch hat, and I did this all the way down till the word treat was spelled out with the other shapes in between the ghost shapes. Lastly, I used some jute rope that I had in my stash from Dollarama and put a hanger on to the back of the sign. I just did this by hot gluing it in place. I put hot glue, a line of hot glue, then the jute rope, and then put some extra hot glue over top of the rope ends just to give it extra security. And that was it. You now have a sweet trick-or-treat sign that you could hang inside as home decor or even on your door for all your little trick-or-treating friends on Halloween. DIYs 2 and 3 are a little more quick and easy. So for DIY number 2, I started with one of these 6x6 wood panels that I got from Dollar Tree and began by painting the frame and the back and a little bit of the center with black acrylic paint. When the paint was dry, I chose another piece of scrapbooking paper from Close to My Heart. I know they typically change up their papers all the time, so I'm sure this isn't paper you would still be able to get, as I've had it in my stash for a long time, but any Halloween scrapbooking paper that you want to use would work fine in this instance. I am sort of measure it out by pushing it into the frame and use the indentation lines that I've made to use as guides. I then took my ruler and made lines along those indentations, and then when I cut it out, I cut it a little on the bigger side than the lines I had made, because it's always easier to make something smaller than it is to try and make something bigger, because obviously once you've cut it off, you've cut it off, so you can't actually make anything bigger. You'd have to start again. Anyways, cut on the larger side, and if it still doesn't fit, just slowly trim down small portions till you get it to fit inside the frame. When my paper fit, I glued it into the frame using my 3-in-1 Advanced Craft Glue by Beacon. Next, with one of these wooden word cutouts from Dollar Tree, they come in a pack of 3. I painted the words Happy and Halloween with 2, possibly 3 coats of acrylic white paint from Dollar Tree. I tried to get as much of the edge of the letters as possible, but I didn't really care too much how well I covered them. When the white paint was dry, I went in with a small paintbrush and Craft Smart chalk paint in burnt orange and painted in the pumpkin shape. This only required 1 coat of paint. Lastly, I used some jute twine from Dollar Tree that I already had in my stash and made a simple shoelace bow, trimmed it down the ends once I had it the size I wanted, and used some of my Gorilla Glue to glue it to the base of the stem of the pumpkin. Then I laid the word cutout on top of the frame just to take a mental note of where it hits the frame and needs some glue, and I used the same Gorilla Glue to add on to the little bits of the wording that meet the sign and glued it into place, and that was it for DIY number 2. For DIY number 3, we're going to start with these small skeleton heads. They come in an 8-pack from Dollar Tree, and we're going to paint all of them white. I used my homemade chalk paint. The color is Swiss Coffee, and it's a bear paint color. I gave each of the skulls 2 coats, letting it dry in between. Today's video is part of one of my favorite challenges. It's the 5 under 5, where we are given the task of creating 5 different DIYs under $5 each. This awesome playlist is hosted by 2 awesome creators. One is Emily from Farm Charm Chic, and the other is Missy from Crafty Cove DIY. And their guest host this month is Michelle from Moxie, DIY in Java. I will have a link to all their channels in my description box below, as well as a link to the playlist for you to check out once you're done watching my video. While the skeleton head's dry, I took one of these box signs from the Halloween section at Dollar Tree and took out the little hanger part that you would use to hang it on your wall, then painted all of the inside and the walls and the front of the edge that's showing. I painted this all with black acrylic paint from Dollar Tree. Once everything was dry, I used some of this decorative moss that I had in my stash. Spanish moss would work just as well because I only wanted to use the light colored moss out of this pack, and I couldn't find my Spanish moss, and I didn't really want to go out and run out and buy any. So there are two options. You could use the green if you want as well, but I was thinking this tanny colored moss was a little spookier, I guess. Not as alive looking as the green stuff. So I just picked through and got as much of the tan colored moss as I could, and I began by hot gluing a bit of it to the bottom of the box. Next, I took one of the skeleton heads and added a generous amount of hot glue onto the bottoms and glued it at an angle onto the top of the moss that we had just glued into the box. I did try to put some glue at the back to hold it even more in place. This didn't work, but as you'll see coming up, I do start adding hot glue onto the back of the skull heads to help it hold a little more, to make it a little more of a stronger hold. So next, I just continue in a pattern of laying a little bit of the moss with hot glue on top of a skull head, then use the hot glue on the bottoms and backs of the skull heads. Obviously, I didn't get the memo at this one. Maybe it takes me 2 or 3 skull heads to realize that I should add some glue to the back, but I just continued in this manner and alternating the directions of the skull heads. I just continued in this manner all the way till the box was full. I think I was able to fit 7 out of the 8 heads into the box. And that was it for DIY number 3. I think it's a cute decorative piece that you could display in your home. If you like this, why don't you give it a big thumbs up or let me know what you think of these in the comments below. For DIY number 4, I started with one of these wooden signs. Again, in my last video, I used one of these and I found this shape also. They're completely awesome to get if you find them at Dollar Tree because they are blank slates that don't require you to remove any pieces or papers off of. The only thing I did have to remove was the sticker and the hanger piece that was stuck onto the wood also. Once those were removed, I went in with my black acrylic paint and painted the edges of the entire board. You don't have to worry about how much of a mess you make on the front or back, as these will both be covered later on. With another one of these wooden words from Dollar Tree, I painted the word spooky with black acrylic paint. It only required 1 coat, and I did the edges as best I could on all the letters, and then went in with white acrylic paint and a small brush to paint the ghost. It required 2, possibly 3 coats, just as white as you want it to be, basically. So for me, I think I put 3 coats on. 2 probably would have done the job, letting it dry in between each coat. Again, using some scrap of paper that I had in my stash from Close to My Heart, I chose 2 patterns that went well together, only because I didn't have enough of one of the patterns to fit the whole board. So if you recreate this in any way, by all means, if you have enough paper to cover the board entirely with one pattern, do that. But I decided to use 2 pattern pieces to cover the entire board. And actually, I think I really like how this turns out, so I probably would suggest doing it this way, but you don't have to by any means. So I laid my first piece on and put the word spooky because it's going to be going at the top. And then I knew that I was going to be adding one more word under the word spooky. So that's why I left some room before adding the next scrapbook paper. Once I had the size determined, I used a pencil to make a notch so I knew where I wanted to cut the first piece, and then the second piece I just rub along the bottom of the sign with my fingers, sorry it's off camera, to get an indentation, and then cut along that line. Once I had cut down both the pieces of scrapbook paper, I then used the wooden board as my template and traced on with my pencil where I needed to cut out the little curved portions. I just did this with my scissors. And again, I did it a little on the bigger side as I knew I was going to go back in with my sanding sponge to clean up all the edges. Then I just glued the papers in place. I first glued the smaller one and then glued the longer one after tracing the curves onto it and cutting them out as well. To finish off where the two pattern pieces of paper meet, I took a third piece of scrapbooking paper and made it 1/2 inch wide, then cut it down to the width of the sign and glued it into place over top of the two seams. To clean up around the edge of the sign, I just take my sanding sponge from Dollar Tree and sand away any of the excess scrapbooking paper, going in a downwards motion all the way around the sign. I also like that this gave it a more of a worn look, as some of the white under the patterned part of the paper started to show through on the edges. Next, I used some of this galvanized wire that I got from Dollarama. I think you will need, I cut 22 inches, but that ended up being too much. So I think you'll need, I'm not too sure. Sorry, I don't have the exact measurement. I measured when it was 22 inches because I thought, okay, I'll tell them how much I needed, but I actually needed less. And this project was kind of going from my mind and trying to get it to work. So you'll see that it's a lot of trial and error coming up. So anyways, I use, again, this galvanized wire. I cut it with my wire cutters to the length I needed, and then began just bending it back and forth into as straight a line as possible. Once the wire was straightened, I bent about 1 inch from the bottom up on the wire and did about a 90-degree bend in the wire, then held it on the left side of the board about 1 inch in from the edge and 1 inch up from the curve, and then just held it in place, working my way around, making a rainbow shape. Then when I was at the same spot on the right side as where I started, roughly on the left side, I trimmed down my wire, leaving an extra bit or so about an extra inch, because this is where then I take my multi-tool and go in about 1 inch from the opposite end of the wire and make another 90-degree bend into the wire. I hope my words are making sense. If they're not, hopefully the video is helping you to understand this a bit better. But if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Once I was happy with the size and shape that I had made out of the wire, I used my pencil to mark where we're going to make some drill holes. So I just kind of rotated the wire so that the points of the wires, or the ends of the wires, were facing the board, because this is also how we're going to assemble it. So I held the wire where I thought it would look best and marked with my pencil mark. So I did this on the left side, and then I just eyeballed roughly, or actually I did measure. I measured how far in from the edge it was, the first mark, and then repeated it again on the right side of the board. Making sure to put scrap wood underneath my project so that I wouldn't drill into my table, I used my Mastercraft power drill and a 1/16 inch drill bit and drilled holes where I had marked with the pencil. This size was just right, as it just allowed the wire to slip in with not too much of extra space. You want your wire to fit into your holes as snug as possible. I then dry fitted the wire piece onto the sign. So I just put in the wire ends into each hole, and then with my hand just bent the wire into a little bit of a wider shape and more of a symmetrical shape, just till my eyes were happy. With some of this black glitter black glitter vase filler. Sorry, we'll do that again. From Dollar Tree in their party section. I separated out the largest size of the balls. There's, I think, roughly maybe 3 sizes, but for this project, you'll only need the large ones, and you'll actually only need 10. So count out 10 of the large ones and set the rest aside. If you don't like glitter or you don't want to use these, as my daughter clearly pointed out, she's like, I like your sign, but not with the glitter on the balls. You could always use wooden beads or other colored beads, anything else that will fit onto the wire and move smoothly around it will work in place of these black glitter vase fillers. Taking a wooden skewer stick from, you guessed it, Dollar Tree, I began poking holes into the centers of the balls so that they could be threaded onto the wire. So I just carefully pushed the skewer through. I did it from one end, then did it from the other end, and then just wiggled it around a bit. You will want to be careful because if you go maybe too fast or too hard, sometimes some of the parts of the balls break off. You could fill in this white part of the styrofoam that's showing with some black paint, but if you do this carefully, not too much of the white styrofoam will start showing through. So I repeated this for all 10 of the balls. When all the balls had some holes in them, I just took out one of the ends from the sign, straightened it out, and threaded all the black beads on. Once they were all on, I just rebent the wire at the 1-inch mark and put it back into the sign just to make sure that everything would move and slide and work accordingly before gluing everything into place. If you think you know what I'm making, I would love to hear your guesses at this point in the comments below. I'm not sure if it's getting too obvious at this point, but I would love to know if you think you know what we're making. For the next step, I just removed the wire from the sign as it made it easier to attach the letters. So I just used my letter and some black letter stickers from Dollarama. They worked out to be the perfect size, and I already had them in my stash, so that was another bonus. And I used the letters METER to spell out the words meter, because with the spooky wooden words we had painted in the beginning, we are making a spooky meter. I hope you guys like this. I think it's original. I'm not sure if it's been made before, but this came to my mind, and actually, I'm super excited with how it turns out. It's much cuter than I thought. Everything worked out according to plan, thank goodness. But yeah, definitely you'll have to let me know what you guys think of this. Or if you've seen it before, let me know that too, because I would definitely give credit to whoever has made this before. But if I am the first, which I'd like to think maybe I'm the first, don't want to toot my own horn, but I think it's really cute. I used my plastic ruler to line up the letters to get the spacing as best as I can, like to eyeball the space as best I can. The ruler helps because I can attach the bottoms of the letters on, and then when I have them where I want them, I can just press the letters onto my sign and slowly pull out the ruler from the bottoms, leaving the letters on the sign where I want them. To attach the word spooky above the word meter, I used my 3-in-1 Advanced Craft Glue by Beacon and just put it all over the backs of the letters and glued this into place, just eyeballing it as best as possible to center. To glue the wires in, I put a dot of my Gorilla Super Glue into each hole, then pushed my wire through till it was just poking out of the back, then loaded the back with hot glue over top of the holes where the wires were. I'm hoping, again, seeing as this is the first time I've ever made something like this, I'm hoping that will do the trick. But if you can think of a better way to hold the wire in, please, by all means, let me know in the comments below. Then just one of the finishing touches at the bottom of the meter, I added a 0 on the left side of the meter and a 1 and a 0 for 10 on the right side of the meter. So it's a 1 to 10 meter, or it's, 0 to 10. Oh my gosh, getting so confused. Sorry. It's a 0 to 10 meter. Again, I had my daughter chirping at me saying, why is it from 0? Shouldn't it be from 1 to 10? Anyways, once you've had it on your values, I then took some jute rope from Dollarama that I had in my stash and just glued on with hot glue a hanger to the back of the sign. I used brown craft paper from Dollar Tree to cover the back of the sign to finish it off, and that is it for DIY number 4. You'll have to let me know, please, please let me know what you think of this. Again, like I said, I'm really excited about it, but I'd love to know your thoughts as well. DIY number 5 is another quick one, but it's a cutie. I started with one of these white foam pumpkins from Dollar Tree and removed the tag and the stem, which my children had already done for me, so thank you, because it did need to come out. And I begun by painting it with a black latex paint all over. Next, I'm going to start dismantling one of these glow-in-the-dark 18-inch skeletons from Dollar Tree. Again, my lovely children had already started to disassemble and reassemble it. As you notice, there's a hand on the knee, or, well, a hand, arm bone hanging from the knee bone. Anyways, begin by cutting off the top part of the hanger. I did this with scissors and it cut very easily. It's soft plastic. I just sanded down the tops just to make it a little more smooth, or to get rid of any of the pieces I couldn't quite get flush with the scissors. Then I cut along the neck bone where the neck meets the rib cage. I believe that's where it is, or where that section is that I cut. The other pieces you'll need from the skeleton are the leg bone from the knee down and the foot bones, both of those, and the hand bone and the arm right above it. You'll need both sides of those. I then took some pipe cleaner that I already had in my stash and made 2 4-inch cuts. Next, I bent each of the 4-inch pieces in half and twisted the ends together so that we had 2 thicker 2-inch pieces. I then added a generous amount of hot glue into the hole of the arm bone and put in 1 piece of the pipe cleaner and just held it in place till it was dry. I also added, for extra security, some more hot glue around the outside. I repeated this for the other arm bone as well. I added a little bit of hot glue at the back of the neck bone and the base of the skull where they met, and held it in place at an angle so that the head was tilted back, and held that in place until it dried. I used my scissors to make a small puncture hole in the middle of the pumpkin at the top, which is where we can stick the neck bone into. I also added a generous amount of hot glue around the end of the neck bone to help it hold in place in the hole. Then I used, again, a generous amount of hot glue and took my time to hold them in place, doing one at a time. I glued the legs to the center bottom on an angle so that it looks like our pumpkin man skeleton is sitting with his legs kind of open in a V shape, if that makes sense. I did the same for the other leg. For some added security, I added another generous amount of hot glue all the way around the edges of the bones and held it upside down until the glue had hardened. With another one of these wooden word cutouts from Dollar Tree, I painted the entire thing with 1 good coat of white acrylic paint from Dollar Tree. Next, I held the arm pieces against the side of the pumpkin to see where they would look best. When I was happy with the position, I took a pencil and just poked a hole for the pipe cleaner to feed into. I fed the pipe cleaner into the hole and then repeated the same process on the other side. When I was happy with the position of the arms, I added in some hot glue around the hole and under the bone to help it hold more securely in place. Then I took the dried word boo, added hot glue on the back center of the sign, and then glued it to the center of the pumpkin. And that is it for this DIY. I think it turned out super cute. It's super cute to display on a shelf or on a mantle or even on a tier tray if you want. I can't wait to see it glow in the dark. I unfortunately didn't have time to take pictures of it in the dark for you, but I think it'll be super cute. If you like this video, why don't you give it a big thumbs up or share it with some friends and family? Both of those things really help to support my channel. And if you want to keep watching, why don't you check out these videos right here? As always, thanks for watching, and if you want to see more of this content, like more DIYs and thrift flips, why don't you consider hitting that big red subscribe button to be notified anytime I upload a new video. Bye!